Press record. Hi, Pedro. So we're here today just discussing the value of iteration and what that means for design at GitLab. And I just wanted to start off and get you to talk about what does iteration mean at GitLab and how does that impact the role of design?
Yeah, that's a big question. Yeah, first of all, thank you for having me and yeah, hearing my, I think, rants about iteration at GitLab. No, I'm just kidding. But I think, so what does iteration mean at GitLab? I think what summarizes it best is putting something out there, even if you feel embarrassed about it. I think it's a good way to summarize how we do iteration in every aspect of the company, not only product. And sometimes, and I know that's probably something that we'll touch on later, it has a very big impact on the user experience. Shipping something that we are kind of embarrassed about, we're not very comfortable, but that maybe users are also kind of embarrassed to see that experience in the product that they're paying for. And so it's hard to manage all of that. I think in terms of design, for me, it was a very big shift that I had to do because previously I was working in consultancies and doing client projects. And when you're doing client projects, the iteration, it almost doesn't exist because, yeah, the clients, usually the mindset is you have a start and finish date. This is what we're going to do during this time. And if we want to iterate on that, you have to be very careful because you know you have that due date when you need to deliver the project. So you can do some iteration inside of it, but it's not a real iteration in the sense of what we do at GitLab, that we know we can always perfect things and improve them over time based on what we learned. So it was kind of a change to come here and do that. Especially, I think what we try to do differently from other product companies is that we focus, again, on making something so embarrassingly small. And sometimes I feel that we get trapped in that thought, and everyone, the engineers, the product manager, the designer, are just so focused on making things smaller that we've gone past the point of what would be something valuable, and maybe we need to stop doing this process of just going down and then making things smaller and just ship this thing that we've already decided is valuable. And I suffer from that every time I'm looking at issues and even merge requests. How can we break this and do other things later? But it's a vicious cycle. I think you can be in that forever. It's like perfecting and shaping and polishing something. So it's, I think there's also, and I don't think we talk a lot about that, but there's also the danger of perfectionism in the iteration process. And we try to be perfectionists in the iteration process. Like, iteration is what we do. We have iteration office hours where Sid, our CEO, and some other folks join to help with the iteration. And I think there's a line where we have to cross and say, no, we'll stop here. We're not going to iterate more on this, or we're not going to break this down into smaller pieces. Yeah. How about you? How, as a more recent GitLabber or team member, how did iteration at GitLab impact your work?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think you bring up like a really important point. I'm definitely a recovering perfectionist. So dealing with iteration to the extent that GitLab does iteration has actually been a pretty big learning for me. And I think the biggest insight that I got from it has been around our relationship with uncertainty. When you do designs or when you conduct research, you have a certain level of certainty or uncertainty on how effective you think that design is going to be. But it's not until you actually ship it and put it in the real world, get it in the context of the actual product, and get it in the hands of lots of users that you truly understand how effective the thing is that you designed. So putting out something which is embarrassingly small, I think, is worthwhile doing, but it's, I think, really hard for designers to get their head around to start out with. So I totally agree. And I suppose I wanted to bring up that sign behind you right now, because that's a great sign, and I think that's sort of what spurred this initial discussion.
Put it there on purpose. Yeah.
Talk me through that sign, please.
Yeah, I actually, I think I would like, I mean, I could talk about it, but I actually would like for you to talk about it first, because I mean, I kind of stole it from, not necessarily from you, because these words and the way of phrasing this come from many different places. And just yesterday, Daniel Grueso, the product manager for Source Code, he was also looking at this sign, and he said, oh, at my previous company, T-Mobile, we had someone there who tried to push for this mentality, but that person used the words "think big, act small," and in terms of conciseness and also being more generic and not using the verb ship, I actually prefer act small. I think that's really powerful. And today I discovered that there's not only there's a book called Think Big, Start Small, Move Fast. There's one that just called Think Big, Act Small. So there's a lot of variations to this. But I think it would be helpful for someone who's viewing this video to learn how we came about this, and maybe if you could talk a little bit of how did you first introduce that term, and why do you introduce it in that issue that we were talking?
Sure. So I think one of the key responsibilities of a designer is to be able to zoom in and out of a problem. And only by zooming into the details and then zooming out to the broader picture of how the thing you're designing fits into the problem space and the solution space are you able to find like the optimal balance between whatever it is that you're designing for. So when we ship small, sometimes you have the tendency to only think about that iteration that you're working on and then potentially the smaller iteration after that. But in order to make the right decision on what sort of path you want to take with your iterations, it's good to have a bigger understanding of how this fits into stuff. So although the thing you're shipping is embarrassingly small, it also fits into a broader picture of something that you're trying to achieve. So that's where I think the whole think big, ship small, move fast comes into play, is that you're thinking about trying to tackle something big, but you're being practical and you're being realistic with how you're actually going about shipping it, which I think is a good way of going.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, if you don't mind, I'm going to share I think it's a great metaphor. I'm going to share what I showed in the last UX showcase, where we were talking about iteration on one of the features that we're developing in the product area, source code. And yeah, it's this painting. Yeah, do you see my screen?
Yeah.
Yeah, so this painting, it was I saw this painting in a blog post talking about product management, and the metaphor that is commonly used in product management is seeing the trees as well as the forest. And I think, Nick, that's what you were saying with seeing like transversing the macro and the micro, and seeing everything and seeing just the details. And so they use this metaphor, and I think it applies very well to what we're talking about here. And so this painting, took 2 years to create, by Georges Seurat, and it's called A Sunday Afternoon on the Island of La Grande Jatte. And he basically iterated on top of this painting. So he created multiple ideas, sketches, different mock-ups before arriving here. And to focus both on the details as well as the big picture, it was a requirement because he was using a technique called pointillism, that only uses very small colored dots and no brush strokes. So every time he was putting like a small colored dot, every time he was shipping small things, he had to look at the big picture to understand if he was going in the right direction to create this masterpiece. So I think this is a good metaphor for what we were talking here.
Nice, that's beautiful. I've never seen that before, so thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, yeah,
Now,
and one of the things that I feel we don't do so well is the thinking big, seeing the whole forest. We're much more concerned about the details and putting something out there, which is valuable, but I don't think we take enough time, we dedicate enough time to take a step back and look at something and plan it well, or as with the level of fidelity or detail as necessary before going in and trying to do something. And I think we all often talk about, hey, we will ship something small, we'll learn from it, and we'll adapt the roadmap. And that is true. I think we do that to a certain extent. But there's, I think, two problems with that. We keep doing really small things in a succession. And when you then zoom out and look at everything that you've done, and maybe you iterated a lot, those 4, 5, 6, 10, 20 iterations, maybe they don't fit well together, or even well with other iterations that have been done in parallel by the same team or by other teams. So that, I think, that is seeing the forest and then like a bundle and a group of forests. And I think the learning part should inform not only the iteration that we're going to do next, but also the bigger plan. So I think the think big could be seen as a something detrimental to our iteration value, because we don't make big plans, we just do small things and we go along with the flow. But I actually think that if we see the forest, we try to sketch out a plan, it will allow us to iterate better going forward. And at least if I think the best argument for this, if not for design or product management, is for engineering, because I hear engineers a lot talking about like on the second and third iteration, they say, oh, if we knew that we would be going in this direction somehow, and we had like an idea, even if it was just some clues, we would have designed a different architecture for the code or the system or whatever it is. And now we will have to refactor all of that so that we can iterate better in the future. And that to me is a sign of not taking a step back, but also in terms of transparency and collaboration, but those are other concerns.
Cool. Yeah, I totally agree. Engineers always say it's useful to understand a little bit more context of potentially where we could be going. And that helps them to configure their code in a particular way that optimizes towards that. The way I've described it before is when you're doing your designs for these iterations, sometimes you can take 2 steps forward in terms of where you're going and then 1 step back to make it even smaller. And that helps to set the context a little bit more towards that bigger picture that you're talking about. But that's all we've got time for today. Do you want to leave us with any sort of closing thoughts around our value of iteration?
Yeah, I think I just wanted to say that I deeply appreciate these conversations that you're trying to have, Nick. I think they're really valuable. And in terms of the iteration and the values that we're talking about here, I think they apply not only to design, but to product. I think product management and design are so linked together in these values and in going through the iteration process that I think product management, having their voices heard and also sharing this with them would be really valuable. Yeah.
Great, and that sets us up for our next value of collaboration. So we'll leave it on a cliffhanger.
Cool. Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much, Pedro.
Yeah. Thank you, Nick.
Ciao.